The train's whistle echoed across the wide prairie, a long, mournful cry that seemed to carry both promise and dread. Dust swirled around the platform as the iron beast hissed to a halt, its doors opening to spill out tired passengers. Among them stepped a young woman, no more than 20, her pale blue dress wrinkled from days of travel, her bonnet shielding a face that was both hopeful and weary. Her name was Clara Weston. She clutched a small carpet bag in one hand, the other pressed against her chest where a folded letter rested beneath her bodice. That letter, written in a man's firm but slightly awkward hand, had been her lifeline these past weeks, a promise of marriage, stability, and perhaps love in the unforgiving land of the West. She scanned the platform eagerly, her heart fluttering. She had never seen the man in person, only his photograph, a stern-faced rancher with strong shoulders and eyes that seemed steady. He had written kindly, telling her he needed a wife to help him tend his home, that he was tired of loneliness. Clara had been tired of loneliness, too. Her eyes darted through the crowd. Cowboys shuffled past, tipping hats to ladies. Families embraced. Miners stomped off the train with heavy boots, eager for drink. But where was he? Where was the man who had promised her a new life? At last she spotted him. He leaned against a post, arms crossed, hat pulled low, his broad frame unmistakable. Relief flooded her, and she hurried forward, nearly tripping on her hem in her eagerness. "Mr. Harlan?" she asked breathlessly, clutching her bag tighter. "It's me, Clara Weston, your bride." He lifted his head. His eyes swept over her quickly, too quickly, like a man sizing up a horse he didn't quite like. "For a heartbeat," he said. Nothing, and Clara's smile trembled but held. Then he gave a curt nod. "You're smaller than you wrote," he said flatly. His voice was low, rough, but without warmth. Clara blinked. "Smaller? And younger," he added, frowning. "I thought you'd be stronger. I needed someone who could work. A ranch out here doesn't run itself." Her breath caught. She had imagined a shy smile, maybe even a rough but kind embrace. Instead, she felt the ground shift beneath her boots. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a steadiness into her voice. "I can work, Mr. Harlan. I'm not afraid of it. I came all this way because I believed your words." He looked away, jaw tightening. "I thought I wanted this. A wife, someone to cook, clean, maybe give me children. But now that I see you." He let the words hang, cruel in their silence. Clara's throat burned. The wind tugged at her bonnet, ribbons snapping them against her cheek. "You mean to say," she whispered, "that you don't want me?" Harlan shifted uncomfortably, but his eyes were hard. "It ain't personal, miss. You just ain't what I expected. I can't take you in, not out there. You'd wither in a week." Her carpet bag slipped from her fingers, thudding against the wooden planks of the platform. Around them, people bustled, paying little mind, though a few cast curious glances. Clara felt heat sting her eyes. "But I have nowhere else," she said, her voice trembling. "I sold everything to come here. I trusted you. Then you were a fool." His words cut sharp, leaving no room for mercy. He pushed off the post, tipped his hat without looking at her, and strode away toward his horse tied near the hitching post. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding, her chest tight. She wanted to call after him, to beg him to reconsider, but pride stiffened her spine. She would not chase a man who had discarded her like an unwanted letter. Still, as his figure disappeared down the dusty road, despair pressed down heavy. The train whistle shrieked again, announcing its departure. Clara spun, panic rising. Should she board again? But no, the last of her money had gone into the ticket west. She couldn't go back. She couldn't even pay for a night's lodging. She sank onto the bench, clutching her bag as though it were a lifeline. The crowd thinned. Soon the platform grew quiet save for the creak of wood and the cry of distant crows. By late afternoon, the sun burned hot and Clara's stomach cramped with hunger. She nibbled the last of the bread she had packed days ago, crumbs sticking to her dry lips. She tried to pray, whispering words her mother once taught her, but each prayer ended in tears. As evening fell, shadows stretched long across the prairie. The town itself was little more than a scattering of wooden buildings: saloon, general store, blacksmith, sheriff's office. Strangers glanced her way, some with pity, others with suspicion. A woman alone, no husband, no money, no kin such. Women didn't last long out here. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to let them see her fear. She would endure. She had to, but when night came, the air turned cold. Without a roof, she huddled against the station wall, pulling her shawl tight. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries sharp against the silence. Each sound made her flinch, her imagination conjuring dangers creeping closer. She thought of home, the green hills of Missouri, her mother's soft hands, her younger brother's laughter. She had left all that behind for a chance at belonging. And now? Now she had nothing but the dust beneath her boots. Hours dragged. The stars glittered. Above, vast and uncaring. Clara's body ached from the bench, her mind heavy with exhaustion. Somewhere, deep in the night, she drifted into fitful sleep, but the morning brought no relief. Hunger gnawed sharper now, and her lips cracked from thirst. She tried to ask at the store for work, but the keeper shook his head. Got no use for strays, he muttered. The saloon keeper laughed outright when she asked about serving tables. By noon, she wandered beyond town, her steps heavy, vision blurring. The prairie stretched endless before her, golden grass swaying in the wind. She walked until her knees buckled, then collapsed against a rock, her shawl falling from her shoulders. Her breath came ragged. The sun beat down merciless. Clara pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the crumpled letter there, the one that had brought her here to this cruel fate. She wanted to tear it, to scream, but she hadn't the strength. As the world darkened around her, one final thought flickered. So this is how it ends, alone, forgotten. Then, faintly, through the haze, she heard it, a sound that did not belong to wind or bird. Hooves, steady, strong, drawing closer. Clara forced her eyes open. Across the shimmer of heat, a dark figure approached on horseback. A man, tall and broad, his hair long and black beneath the wide sky. A bow hung at his side, a spear strapped across his back. His horse, a muscled Mustang, moved with grace and power. Her breath caught. Fear mingled with fragile hope. The stories she had heard of Comanche warriors flooded her mind, savage, ruthless, unforgiving. Yet in her broken state, even fear felt like salvation. The rider drew nearer, his gaze fixed on her, unreadable. The last of her strength failed, and Clara's head drooped against the rock. The world blurred to gray. When she thought she would slip into nothingness, she heard a deep, steady voice above her, speaking in accented but clear English. You will die here if you stay. Her cracked lips parted, but no words came. The stranger dismounted, crouched beside her, and held a water skin to her lips. Coolness touched her tongue, and she drank greedily, tears spilling down her face. The warrior studied her silently, his eyes dark pools of something she couldn't yet name. Then he spoke again, his tone firm, final, like the closing of a door. Coming home with me. The water dripped down Clara's chin as she swallowed greedily, each drop a lifeline against the burning thirst that had clawed her throat raw. She gasped when the waterskin was pulled away, her trembling fingers reaching out as if to beg for more. The man crouched before her was like no one she had ever seen up close. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his cheekbones sharp, his long black hair tied back with a strip of leather. He wore a buckskin shirt fringed at the edges, soft moccasins that made no sound as he moved, and across his back hung weapons that marked him as a warrior, a bow of polished wood and a quiver of arrows, a spear wrapped in feathers. His dark eyes studied her without pity, but also without cruelty. It was the gaze of someone who had seen death too many times and recognized how close she was to it. "You saved me," Clara whispered hoarsely, her voice ragged from thirst. The warrior did not nod nor smile. He simply tilted the water skin and offered it again. "Drink." She obeyed, her hands trembling as she clutched it. The water soothed her parched throat, but fear gnawed at her heart. This man was Comanche. Back east, she had heard stories whispered by travelers, terrifying tales of raids, scalping, and merciless vengeance. Yet here he was, kneeling beside her in the dust, sharing water when no one else had spared her a glance. "Why?" she managed. At last, lowering the skin, "Why are you helping me?" His eyes narrowed slightly, his voice low and deliberate. "Because if I leave you, you die, alone, like coyote bones in the sun." Her heart jolted at his bluntness. His words were not tender, not gentle, but true. She could not deny it. The warrior stood then, tall and commanding, the sun casting his shadow across her crumpled figure. His horse pawed the ground nearby, snorting as if impatient. The man extended a hand, palm calloused, fingers steady. "Come," he said firmly, "with me." Clara stared at that hand as though it were a rope thrown to a drowning soul. Yet fear rooted her. "With you? To your people? Yes." He spoke as if it were already decided. "You cannot stay. Here, no food, no fire, no man to guard you. You will die." His gaze swept over her small form, her tattered shawl, her fragile frame that trembled with exhaustion. "You are not strong enough." The words stung, though they were true. Still, pride flared in her chest. "I can manage," she whispered, though even as she said it, her knees buckled when she tried to rise. She stumbled back onto the rock, her vision swimming that the warrior did not mock her. He simply crouched again, his face close enough that she could see the fine lines etched by sun and wind around his eyes. "You cannot manage, not alone. You come with me, or you die here." His tone left no space for argument. Clara's lips trembled. Every warning her mother had given about the dangers of the frontier, every fearful tale of savages, rose in her mind. But what choice did she have? The man who had promised her a future had abandoned her. The townsfolk had turned her away. She had nothing. No one. Her gaze flicked to the horizon. The prairie stretched endless, cruel in its beauty. She would not survive another night. Her eyes returned to the Comanche's hand. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her trembling fingers into his palm. His grip closed firm around hers, pulling her up as though she weighed no more than a child. She swayed, dizzy, but his arm steadied her, strong and sure. Without another word, he guided her toward his Mustang. The horse was magnificent deep chestnut, muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat, its mane braided with leather strips. It tossed its head when Clara neared, as though sensing her fear. She froze, clutching the warrior's arm. I've never ridden one like this," she confessed. He gave a short nod. "You ride with me." Before she could protest, he mounted in a smooth, practiced motion, then reached down. His hand caught her arm, pulling her up in one swift motion. Clara gasped, finding herself seated before him on the horse's back, her skirts bunched awkwardly. His arm slid around her waist, steadying her against him. The warmth of his body pressed close, his heartbeat solid and calm compared to her racing pulse. The Mustang snorted, then surged forward at a command in Comanche tongue. The world blurred as they rode, wind whipping Clara's bonnet strings against her cheeks, dust rising beneath pounding hooves. Fear clutched her throat at first. Every instinct screamed she was in the hands of a stranger, a man from a people she had been taught to fear. Yet as the miles passed, something else crept in a fragile thread of safety. His arm never wavered from her waist, holding her steady each time the horse leapt over uneven ground. His voice, low and commanding, murmured words to the mustang that calmed the beast's wild pace. By nightfall, the prairie glowed golden in the setting sun. The warrior slowed the horse near a stream, dismounted, then lifted Clara down as if she weighed nothing. She staggered, her legs weak from the ride. He guided her to a flat rock by the water's edge. From his saddlebag, he produced dried meat and a small bundle of corn cakes. He handed one to her. "Eat." She hesitated, staring at the food, then at him. "Why do you care if I live?" she whispered. He paused, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then he said quietly, "Because I know what it is to be alone." The words hung between them, heavy with a truth she did not yet understand. Clara ate in silence, each bite, easing the hollow ache in her belly. When she finished, he spread a blanket near the fire he had built with swift, practiced hands. He gestured for her to rest. "You sleep. Tomorrow we ride." Her heart pounded. Tomorrow. That meant deeper into his world, farther from everything she had known. Yet she was too exhausted to protest. She lay on the blanket, the warmth of the fire wrapping her as her eyes fluttered closed. Before sleep claimed her, she turned her head. The Comanche warrior sat cross-legged by the flames, his gaze on the dark horizon, his face carved in shadows. He looked lonely, yes, but also unyielding, like the land itself. Her last thought before sleep pulled her under was not of fear, but of strange, fragile safety. The morning dawned pale and cold, the prairie stretching endless in the silver light. Clara stirred beneath the blanket, her body stiff from sleep on the hard ground. The faint crackle of embers whispered beside her, and when she opened her eyes, she found the warrior already awake. He stood at the stream, filling his waterskin, the sunrise gilding the edges of his long hair. His movements were quiet, deliberate, as though each action belonged to a rhythm older than time. Clara watched him for a moment, half afraid, half curious. When his gaze shifted suddenly, catching hers, she startled and looked away. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She wasn't used to being studied so openly, yet his stare was not leering or cruel, it was simply direct. He approached, setting the waterskin beside her. "Drink," he said simply. She obeyed, sipping the cool water, then braved a glance at him. "I never asked your name," she said softly. He hesitated, then replied, "Tahu." "Tahu," she repeated, the foreign syllables unfamiliar on her tongue. "I'm Clara." He gave a small nod, as though committing it to memory, and turned to ready the horse. Clara chewed her lip, nerves tightening in her chest. Every sensible part of her mind screamed she should flee, that this man was a stranger, a Comanche warrior. No less, someone she had been raised to fear. But as she looked at the endless horizon, she knew the truth. She could not survive out there alone. Still, fear coiled in her stomach when Tahu lifted her onto the Mustang once more, seating her in front of him. The closeness unsettled her, the firm press of his arm, the steady beat of his heart at her back. She had never been held so near by a man before. The Mustang leapt into motion, hooves drumming against the earth. Clara clutched at the mane, her breath caught between fear and wonder. The wind tangled her hair, whipped her bonnet strings, and yet, even as the wild rhythm of the ride threatened to unseat her, Tahu's grip held her steady. After miles passed in silence, Clara dared to speak. "Where are we going?" "To my people," he answered, his voice low, steady against her ear. Her stomach tightened. And what will they think of me?" "They will look," he admitted. "Some will not like, but you are under my protection." His words sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something she could not yet name. The day stretched long, the sun blazing overhead. At midday, Tahu guided the horse beneath a cluster of cottonwoods, letting it drink from the shade-dappled creek. He handed Clara more food-dried venison, a small cake of corn. She ate slowly, watching him. He did not eat until she had finished. "You live different than we do," she said carefully, unsure if speaking of his people would anger him. Tahu's dark eyes flicked to hers. "Different, yes, but not less," Clara flushed. "I didn't mean—" He held up a hand, silencing her. "Apology. I know what your people say, that we are savages, wild, less than men. But I tell you this, Clara." His voice deepened, his gaze unyielding. "My people live with the land, not on it. We do not cut down more than we need. We do not waste what we kill. And we do not leave women to die alone in the dust." The last word struck her like a blow, tearing open the wound left by Harlan's rejection. Her throat tightened and tears threatened, but she blinked them away. "I didn't choose to be left," she whispered. Tahu studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "I know." When they rode again, Clara's mind swirled. His words were sharp, yes, but there was honor in them, something she had not seen in the man who had promised her a home. By evening, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Smoke curled upward from small fires scattered across the plain where tippas stood clustered in a great circle. The sight stole Clara's breath. It was not the savage camp she had pictured from fearful tales. It was alive with children running, women tending fires, men working with horses. A community. A home. Her heart pounded. Would they accept her? Or cast her out as Harlan had? As they descended, the people noticed. Faces turned, voices murmured, and soon a crowd gathered as Tahu rode into camp with the pale-skinned woman before him. Some frowned, others whispered. Children peeked from behind skirts, eyes wide. Tahu dismounted first, then helped Clara down. His hand lingered at her arm, steadying her. She clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, wishing she could shrink. Into invisibility. An older man approached, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes sharp as flint. He spoke rapidly in Comanche, his tone questioning, perhaps accusing. Clara couldn't understand, but she felt the weight of it in her bones. Tahu answered firmly, his voice rising in defense. The man's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Tahu. At last the elder snorted, muttered something, and walked away. Clara trembled. "What did he say?" She whispered. "That you will bring trouble," Tahu admitted. "But I told him you are under my protection. That is enough for now." Her knees threatened to give way beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall. She would not let them see her fear. Tahu guided her to a fire where women worked. There, eyes filled with curiosity and suspicion. One, younger than the rest, offered her a small bowl of stew. Clara accepted it with shaking hands, murmuring, "Thank you." Though she doubted they understood. As she ate, the rich flavors warming her, she felt dozens of eyes watching. She kept her gaze low, trying not to offend, yet every glance revealed. The same man. Tahu standing apart, his arms crossed, his gaze steady on her. That night, as she lay in a borrowed blanket near the fire, Clara's thoughts tumbled. She was far from everything she knew, in a world that felt strange and dangerous. Yet for the first time since arriving in this wild land, she was not alone, and as sleep pulled her under, one thought whispered in her heart, soft and stubborn. Perhaps this was where she was meant to be all along. The first morning in the Comanche camp was unlike any Clara had ever known. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the mingled scents of wood smoke, horses, and roasting meat. Dawn light crept across the tipi hides, painting them in shades of gold. Somewhere nearby, children's laughter rang out as they chased each other barefoot through the grass. Clara stirred beneath the blanket she had been given, her body stiff, her mind torn between gratitude and unease. She sat up slowly, clutching, her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Dozens of curious eyes met hers, women drawing water from the stream, men tending to their horses, elders sitting in silence with pipes. Everywhere she looked, life pulsed with a rhythm she did not understand, and every glance carried the same question: what is she doing here? Her cheeks flushed under their stares. She had thought herself invisible back in town, discarded like rubbish by Harlan. But here, among the Comanche, she felt exposed in a different way, watched, judged, measured against some unseen scale. Tahu appeared then, tall and steady, moving through the camp with the quiet authority of a man respected. His gaze found her. At once, and for reasons she could not explain, her racing heart calmed. "You come," he said simply, gesturing for her to rise. Clara obeyed, brushing dust from her skirt, though she wished for cleaner clothes. She followed him to the stream, where women bent over their work, washing hides, braiding rope, preparing food. Their hands were swift, their laughter low and quick, though they hushed when Clara approached. One of the women, a sharp-eyed elder, with gray streaks in her hair, spoke in Comanche, her tone clipped. Clara didn't know the words, but she knew the meaning. Why is she here? Why bring this pale stranger among us? Tahu answered firmly, his voice low but commanding. Whatever he said silenced the elder, though her glare lingered on Clara like a
thorn. Clara bent to the stream, dipping her hands into the icy water.
She splashed her face, feeling more alive with the shock of it. When she glanced up, she saw one of the younger women watching her with wide, curious eyes. Clara offered a tentative smile. The girl blinked, then shyly returned it before darting. Away doubt it was the smallest crack in the wall of suspicion, but Clara clung to it like a fragile flame. That day, Tahu began to teach her. He showed her how to gather firewood properly, choosing the driest branches, stacking them so air could breathe between the logs. He demonstrated how to grind corn with a stone, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he guided hers. Clara struggled. The stone was heavy, the work slow. Sweat dampened her brow as she pushed and turned. Yet when she finally produced a small pile of coarse meal, Tahu gave a single nod. "Good," he said. Just one word, but in his voice she heard approval, and it warmed her more than she cared to admit. As days passed, Clara began to find a rhythm. She learned to braid ropes from horsehair, to mend small tears and hides, to stir stews thick with beans and venison. She fetched water with the other women, who at first whispered in Comanche where she could not understand, but gradually included her in their gestures and laughter. Still, not all were welcoming. The elder woman continued to glare, muttering that pale women brought trouble. Some of the men avoided her gaze altogether, treating her presence as an omen. Clara felt their judgment heavy, yet each time doubt threatened to crush her, she remembered Tahu's words, "You are under my protection." One evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat near the fire, watching sparks rise into the twilight. Children crowded around her, fascinated by the color of her hair, the lilt of her voice when she told them a simple story her mother once told her. Their laughter was pure, their eyes bright. For the first time since leaving home, Clara laughed. Too softly, but freely. She didn't realize Tahu was watching until the firelight caught his eyes. He stood at the edge of the circle, arms crossed, a faint curve at his lips that might have been the shadow of a smile. Their gazes met, and for a heartbeat, the world around her faded. But life among the Comanche was not easy. Clara's hands, blistered from grinding, her back ached from carrying water. She stumbled often, unused to the uneven ground. More than once, she burned stew or tore rope, earning sighs of frustration from the women beside her. On such days, Clara lay beneath her blanket, tears pricking her eyes. "I don't belong. I never will. Yet each morning she rose again. She forced herself to keep trying, to keep learning. And slowly the work grew less foreign. Her hands hardened, her steps steadied. The women muttered less, then began to guide her with patience instead of scorn. It was not a grand acceptance, not a sweeping welcome, but it was something. One night, as she sat near the fire, Clara whispered to Tahu, "Why did you really bring me here? You could have left me to die and no one would have known." Tahu stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I was tired of watching life leave where it should have stayed." She frowned softly. "What do you mean?" He did not look at her, but his voice was raw. "I lost a woman once. To sickness. She was strong, but the earth took her. I could not stop it." His jaw tightened. "When I saw you in the dust, I saw her again. I would not let it happen twice." Clara's chest ached with the weight of his words. She wanted to reach for him, to comfort, but she held still. Sensing he would not welcome pity. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for saving me." At last he turned his gaze on her, dark and steady. "I did not save you. You saved yourself by choosing to live." Their eyes held across the fire, and Clara realized then, though they came from worlds apart, though the gulf between them seemed endless, something unspoken bridged it, something fragile, something new. And perhaps something. Dangaroo. The Comanche village was alive with the rhythm of its people. The sounds of children laughing, women grinding corn, and the distant thrum of drums in practice carried through the crisp air. Smoke curled from the tops of lodges, drifting toward the sky where hawks circled lazily. For Clara, this was a world completely foreign, yet strangely beginning to feel less like a prison and more like a place where her heart could finally breathe. At first, she had been hesitant, clinging to the edge of the Comanche camp like a lost soul afraid to step fully inside. Every new face felt like a test. Every laugh or whisper made her wonder if it was at her expense. She kept to herself, folding her hands in her lap, sitting quietly near the fire, her eyes always lowered. But Lone Hawk, her Comanche rescuer, did not allow her to drown in shadows. "Walk," he said one morning, his deep voice carrying command but not cruelty. He gestured to the open plains beyond the village. His black horse stood ready, tossing its head as if eager to run. Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting in the hem of her plain dress. Lone Hawk took her hand, not roughly, but firmly, and guided her forward. They rode out together, the prairie wind lashing against Clara's cheeks, her hair flying loose from its pins. She felt alive in a way she hadn't since she first stepped onto the boat that carried her west. The world spread out endlessly around her, tall grass swaying like waves, wildflowers dotting the fields, buffalo moving slowly in the distance. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel abandoned or unwanted. She felt free. That evening, Lone Hawk brought her to the riverbank where the women of the tribe washed clothes and fetched water. At first, they eyed her curiously, their gazes sharp yet not unkind. Clara bent to help, clumsily trying to scrub cloth against a rock. The women laughed not cruelly, but warmly, as though amused by a child learning something new. One of them, a kind-eyed woman named Sunbird, came to her side and showed her how to work with rhythm. Clara smiled faintly, her heart stirring with gratitude. Day by day, Clara learned. She learned how to braid grasses, how to grind maize, how to ride bareback with more confidence than she ever thought possible. The children grew bold around her, giggling as they tugged at her skirts or handed her little treasures, a feather, a polished stone, a string of beads. Their laughter eased her loneliness, filling a void left by betrayal and abandonment. But more than anything, it was Lone Hawk's presence that began to heal her deepest wounds. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, each one carried weight. He taught her how to read the signs of the land, pointing at tracks in the dirt and naming the animals that made them. He showed her which plants could soothe a burn, which roots could be brewed into tea for strength. "Why do you help me?" Clara asked one evening as they sat beside the fire, the glow painting his strong features in gold and shadow. She had been meaning to ask for days. Her voice was soft, uncertain, almost afraid of the answer. Lone Hawk looked at her for a long time before replying. "Because you were left to die," he said simply. His dark eyes burned with quiet intensity. "But the Great Spirit does not make mistakes. You were put in my path. You are not meant to be thrown away." Her throat tightened, tears prickling her eyes. No one had ever spoken of her life as if it carried weight, as if she mattered. Not her father, who had practically sold her to a tool. Stranger. Not the groom who had abandoned her without a thought. Yet here was this Comanche warrior telling her she was not worthless. That night, Clara lay awake inside the lodge, listening to the steady rhythm of drums echoing from the distance, her heart pounding in a way she did not quite understand. As weeks passed, the bond between her and Lone Hawk deepened. It was not forced, nor was it rushed. It grew naturally, like a river carving its path through stone. When Clara fell from her horse one afternoon, it was Lone Hawk who lifted her gently, his hand surprisingly tender as he checked her bruised wrist. "You are strong," he told her, his gaze steady, "but strength is not never falling. It is standing after you fall." She held on to those words, repeating them in her heart. One evening, the tribe gathered for a celebration. The air was filled with music drums, flutes, the stamping of feet as dancers moved in circles around the fountain. Fire. Sparks rose into the night, stars joining them in a sky so vast it seemed endless. Clara sat on the edge of the gathering, unsure if she belonged. Then she felt a hand Lone Hawk's rest gently on her arm. "Come," he said, guiding her forward. Her cheeks burned with nerves, but when the children laughed and tugged at her hands, she couldn't resist. She stepped into the circle, her movements clumsy at first, but soon the rhythm carried her. She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since she could remember, her voice ringing free into the night. Lone Hawk watched her, a rare smile, tugging at his lips as if her joy was his own. From that night on, something changed inside Clara. The wall she had built around her heart began to crumble. She no longer walked as though bracing for scorn. She began to look people in the eyes, to speak more freely, to let the sound of her laughter echo in the air without shame. But with healing came new fears. One evening, as she watched Lone Hawk sharpen his knife by the fire, she found her heart racing not with fear, but with something deeper, something that scared her more than any betrayal. She was beginning to care for him, and caring meant risking hurt again. She whispered to herself, staring at the flames, "Can I trust him with what's left of me?" The fire popped, sending sparks into the night sky as if the Great Spirit itself was listening. The first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, painting the endless prairie in soft gold and rose. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the quiet promise of a new day. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, Evelyn felt that. The weight pressing against her chest was beginning to lift. She stood outside the lodge, wrapped in a blanket the Comanche women had woven for her, the fringes brushing against her hands. Behind her, the camp was stirring to life. Fires crackled, children's laughter echoed through the stillness, and the rhythmic sound of ponies being led to water filled the air. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, as though the land itself was telling her she was safe. That morning she remembered how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she had been left in the dust, abandoned by a man who had promised her a life. Alone, starving, betrayed, her future had seemed to die out there on the barren road. Yet here she was now, standing at the edge of a Comanche village, her heart pounding not with fear, but with an unfamiliar sense of hope. And it was all because of him, because of Lone Hawk, the silent warrior who had seen something in her worth saving. The thought of him filled her with warmth that no blanket could provide. Lone Hawk emerged from the shadows of the morning, his tall frame backlit by the rising sun. He carried himself with the same quiet strength she had come to know, each step purposeful, his face unreadable yet never unkind. He held a small bundle of herbs in one hand and his bow in the other, as though he were both provider and protector in every moment. Evelyn watched him without speaking, her heart thundering louder than the thrum of a distant drumbeat. He glanced at her, and for the briefest instant, the corner of his mouth softened almost to smile. She stepped forward hesitantly, her voice catching in her throat. "You always rise before the sun," she said softly, not sure if he would answer. His dark eyes met hers. "The land wakes early," he replied, his voice low and steady, "and so must those who live upon it." There was wisdom in his words, but there was more than that. There was a rhythm, a cadence that reminded her of the earth beneath their feet, unchanging, eternal. She nodded, as though she understood, even if she was still learning. In truth, she was learning so much more than the Comanche way of life. She was learning what it meant to trust again, what it meant to belong. Later that day, the elders gathered around the central fire, their voices deep and commanding, their presence steeped in tradition. Evelyn sat quietly at Lone Hawk's side, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide with nervousness. She felt the weight of their gazes upon her. They were deciding her place here, deciding whether she was truly welcome or just a guest passing through. The air grew thick with tension, but Lone Hawk stood beside her like an unshakable tree, his broad shoulders squared, his gaze unflinching. When the elders spoke of her weakness, of her being an outsider, he answered with words that carried the strength of thunder. "She has endured more than many warriors," he said, his deep voice echoing across the fire. "She has spirit, and spirit cannot be bought or abandoned. It can only be honored." Evelyn's throat tightened at his defense. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't invisible, like she wasn't just some cast-off left to die. She was seen, defended, cherished. The elders exchanged long glances before finally nodding in agreement. Their decision was made. Evelyn would not only stay, she would become one of them. That night, there was a celebration. Fires blazed, drums pounded, voices rose in song that carried to the stars above. Evelyn moved among the people, laughter bubbling from her lips, her heart lighter than it had ever been. Children tugged at her skirt, women clasped her hands, and men bowed their heads in respect. She belonged here not because of what she had been, but because of what she was becoming. Lone Hawk stayed close, always watching, his presence like a shield. When the fire burned low and the stars spilled bright across the heavens, Evelyn and Lone Hawk stepped away from the crowd. They stood at the edge of the prairie where the grass whispered secrets to the wind. She turned to him, her heart trembling with words she had been too afraid to speak. "I don't know why you saved me," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I don't know what you saw in me when even I saw nothing left worth saving." He reached out, his hand rough from years of battle and labor, yet gentle as it brushed against her cheek. "I saw truth," he said simply. "I saw a spirit. That would not break. And I knew. You were meant to walk beside me." Her breath caught, her entire being warming beneath the intensity of his gaze. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of release. She leaned into his touch, her heart finding its rhythm against his. "Then I am home," she whispered, Dot, and in that moment, the prairie seemed to hold its breath. The stars seemed to burn brighter. The earth itself seemed to settle in approval. For Evelyn, home was no longer a distant dream or a broken promise. Home was here, in the strength of the man beside her, in the love that had grown quietly, fiercely, In the ashes of her despair, the abandoned bride had been reborn, and in the arms of the lonely Comanche warrior she had found not only life, but love, a new beginning written in the language of the land and sealed beneath the endless western sky.